In the church records of Connecticut colony between 1647 and 1685, over 300 wills were executed in the small settlement of Newfield, all processed through the same three men sharing the surname Pemberton. What historians found disturbing wasn't merely their number, but what was discovered beneath the floorboards of the Puritan family home. Hundreds of small glass vials containing residue of opium and belladonna alongside journals detailing the divine visions of dying colonists. Visions that mysteriously benefited the Pemberton family's growing fortune. 23 people died within days of signing these wills, all while experiencing what witnesses described as rapturous communion with the divine. The authorities who discovered these records reportedly sealed them away, fearing the scandal would undermine public faith in colonial institutions. The case remained buried in historical archives until 1998, when a Yale researcher stumbled upon these documents and began piecing together what may have been early America's most sinister case of systematic inheritance fraud. The researcher noted something particularly chilling. The Pembertons kept meticulous records of their victims' last moments, including transcriptions of their drug-induced utterances that revealed a pattern of careful manipulation through religious suggestion. What follows is the true account of the Pemberton family and their decades-long scheme of manipulation, deception, and ultimately murder. In their quest for wealth and power, did the Pembertons simply exploit religious fervor and medical ignorance? Or was there something more sinister at work in colonial Connecticut? The truth, as you are about to discover, is far more disturbing than most historical accounts have dared to reveal. The year was 1647, and the settlement of Newfield was still finding its identity among the growing townships of Connecticut colony. Like many New England communities, it was founded by those seeking religious liberty, strict Puritans. W.H. Obadiah tended to the sick with tireless dedication, often spending days at the bedsides of those suffering from the various illnesses that plagued colonial settlements. Jeremiah provided spiritual comfort, his prayers and scriptural readings bringing peace to the afflicted and their families. Cornelius ensured that all legal matters from property disputes to contracts were handled with meticulous attention to detail. It was goodwife Sarah Holcomb who first benefited from what would later become known as the Pembertons' spiritual preparation for death. As the widow of one of Newfield's founding families, Sarah had inherited a considerable property on the eastern edge of the settlement, 60 acres of cleared land with a sturdy house, a barn, and various livestock. When she fell ill with what Obadiah diagnosed as consumption of the lungs, the three brothers took a special interest in her care. For weeks they visited her daily, Obadiah administering various tinctures and powders to ease her earthly suffering, Jeremiah reading scripture and leading her in prayer, and Cornelius ensuring her worldly affairs were in order. The other settlers saw nothing suspicious in this attention. After all, Sarah was a wealthy widow without close family, and it seemed only proper that the community's leaders should ensure her comfort in her final days. What the community didn't witness were the private sessions that occurred after others had left. According to the journal later discovered in the Pemberton home, Sarah Holcomb was the first recipient of what Obadiah called the Elixir of Divine Sight, a brownish liquid administered in carefully increasing doses that sent her into states of delirium that the brothers described to others as spiritual rapture. The journal contains disturbing details about their methodology, noting the widow required 15 drops initially, her constitution weakened by grief and age. Jeremiah would introduce the concept of divine guidance regarding her property, will, while Cornelius prepared documents with blank spaces to be filled with supposed heavenly instruction. When Sarah died, her will left her property entirely to the brothers, who presented it as her divinely inspired last wish. From then on, the pattern repeated with chilling precision. Families who sought comfort in their final moments unknowingly invited the Pembertons into their homes, where Obadiah's drugs, Jeremiah's manipulative sermons, and Cornelius's records combined to strip them of property and leave it in the hands of the brothers. Over the next years, their wealth grew, their position strengthened, and suspicions were quelled by their public piety, donations, and benevolence. By 1655, Jeremiah had been officially appointed as the settlement's minister. Cornelius served as both magistrate and record keeper for all official transactions, and Obadiah's medical authority went unquestioned. They had effectively gained control of Newfield's spiritual, legal, and physical well-being, a position that allowed them to continue their scheme with minimal risk of exposure. The pattern might have continued indefinitely had it not been for the arrival of Constance Pemberton in the summer of 1664. 17 years after the brothers had established themselves in Newfield, a carriage arrived bearing a young woman of about 16 who introduced herself as Obadiah's niece. With her came a letter explaining that she was the daughter of a fourth Pemberton brother, who had remained in England and recently died, leaving Constance in the care of her uncles in the colonies. Tall and slender, with the same penetrating eyes as Jeremiah but a warmth the brothers lacked, Constance quickly became a beloved figure in Newfield. Unlike her stern, reserved uncles, she was quick to smile and eager to assist neighbors with chores or childcare. She attended prayer meetings dutifully, but displayed a different spirit, one more open and kind-hearted than the carefully controlled severity of the brothers. Among the items Constance discovered were substances different from those her uncle used in his regular medical practice, vials and powders labeled in a strange code she could not understand. When she questioned him, Obadiah sharply reprimanded her for snooping and warned her never to touch his special medicines, explaining in stern tones that they were dangerous compounds meant for research purposes only. The matter might have been set aside and forgotten had it not been for what she witnessed at the Thatcher farm the following month. Thomas Thatcher, one of the settlement's most prosperous and respected farmers, had fallen gravely ill with a fever that Obadiah declared was likely to prove fatal. As had become customary, the three Pemberton brothers attended to him during his decline, providing both medical and spiritual oversight in his final days. Constance, who had accompanied them under the pretense of assisting with the Thatcher children, found herself drawn to the sick room, where she observed something through a partially open door that chilled her blood. She saw Obadiah carefully administer a dark liquid unlike any of the remedies she had seen before. It was not among the medicines she knew he dispensed for fevers, chills, or other common ailments. Within an hour of swallowing the draught, Thomas Thatcher began speaking in disjointed phrases, rambling about angels and divine messengers, his eyes wide yet strangely unfocused as though staring at visions invisible to all others in the room. Cornelius sat close beside the bed with pen and paper in hand, recording every word with meticulous attention, while Jeremiah stood at the window murmuring prayers that sounded less like intercession and more like ritual. Constance felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck as she realized that what she had seen in the hidden chest, the coded vials, the strange concoctions, the transcripts, were not theoretical at all. They were being used deliberately, and the brothers author it. Among the items Constance discovered were substances different from those her uncle used in his regular medical practice, vials and powders labeled in a strange code she could not understand. When she questioned him, Obadiah sharply reprimanded her for snooping and warned her never to touch his special medicines, explaining in stern tones that they were dangerous compounds meant for research purposes only. The matter might have been set aside and forgotten had it not been for what she witnessed at the Thatcher farm the following month. Thomas Thatcher, one of the settlement's most prosperous and respected farmers, had fallen gravely ill with a fever that Obadiah declared was likely to prove fatal. As had become customary, the three Pemberton brothers attended to him during his decline, providing both medical and spiritual oversight in his final days. Constance, who had accompanied them under the pretense of assisting with the Thatcher children, found herself drawn to the sick room, where she observed something through a partially open door that chilled her blood. She saw Obadiah carefully administer a dark liquid unlike any of the remedies she had seen before. It was not among the medicines she knew he dispensed for fevers, chills, or other common ailments. Within an hour of swallowing the draught, Thomas Thatcher began speaking in disjointed phrases, rambling about angels and divine messengers, his eyes wide yet strangely unfocused as though staring at visions invisible to all others in the room. Cornelius sat close beside the bed with pen and paper in hand, recording every word with meticulous attention, while Jeremiah stood at the window murmuring prayers that sounded less like intercession and more like ritual. Constance felt the hairs rise on the back of her neck as she realized that what she had seen in the hidden chest, the coded vials, the strange concoctions, the transcripts, were not theoretical at all. They were being used deliberately, and the brothers author it. Constance knew well that her uncles enjoyed food, comfort, and a respected place in the community, and to speak against them, especially without undeniable evidence, would not only jeopardize her security, but might also be dismissed as feminine hysteria or worse, as proof of a troubled spirit in need of correction or punishment. That awareness forced her into silence, yet her conscience demanded action, and so she began her own careful investigation. She carried out her inquiries discreetly, keeping dates, names, and observations in a small journal she hid beneath a loose floorboard in her chamber. Every day she added quiet notations: who had died, what lands had changed hands, what whispers passed in the village about visions or divine wills. She volunteered to assist Cornelius with his endless organizing of papers, and in doing so she gained access to the growing archive of wills, property deeds, and transfers that suspiciously benefited the brothers. When Obadiah needed help in his apothecary, she stood by him, learning to recognize which concoctions he reserved for only the wealthiest or most vulnerable patients, and she memorized their strange odors and colors. She listened intently whenever Jeremiah spoke in confidence to parishioners, catching fragments of manipulation disguised as holy counsel. Months of such vigilance accumulated into a damning collection of knowledge. The true turning point arrived in the bitter winter of 1665, a year and a half after she had first come to Newfield. A heavy snowstorm, relentless in its fury, confined the household for several days, isolating them from neighbors and visitors. Yet even the blizzard could not stop her uncles when word reached them of a wealthy elder's decline, and they departed despite the treacherous drifts, leaving Constance alone. Sensing providence, she seized the opportunity. Her heart pounded as she searched the house with a thoroughness she had never before dared, focusing on locked trunks, sealed drawer. The hidden room contained wonders and horrors that should never have existed in colonial New England. Constance's eyes moved across the shelves with disbelief. Delicate glass distillation equipment of a kind she had only seen in sketches, botanical specimens carefully preserved in alcohol, and an array of labeled jars containing raw materials that suggested a depth of medical knowledge far beyond the crude practices of frontier physicians. It became evident that Obadiah's understanding of chemistry and medicine reached into areas forbidden to common men. His skill no accident, but the product of long study and perhaps darker pursuits. Among the strange instruments she recognized several pieces that bore marks later identified by scholars as property of English universities, suggesting that the Pemberton brothers' criminal activities had begun long before they set foot in the colonies, stretching back across the ocean to their earlier lives. Yet what unsettled her most was not the scientific equipment, but the human evidence. A cabinet, carefully ordered and meticulously maintained, held the personal effects of past victims. Within its drawers lay locks of hair tied with ribbon, fragments of clothing, trinkets of jewelry, and other small personal possessions, each tagged with a name and a date. These were not idle trophies of conquest, but essential tools in their sinister craft. According to Obadiah's own notes, these tokens were incorporated into the preparation of his elixirs, each one intended to resonate with the unique bodily humors of the individual to whom it belonged, ensuring that the treatment would bind more powerfully to its victim. The sheer calculation displayed in this practice revealed a chilling detachment that exceeded ordinary greed, for it was not merely wealth they sought but mastery over life, death, and memory itself. Constance's stomach turned as her gaze fell upon a ledger laid open upon a desk, written in Cornelius's exact and orderly hand. Page A. Constance's shock of realization struck with terrifying clarity. She herself was intended to be their next victim. The heavy snow outside, coupled with her uncle's prolonged constan, gave her a rare and precious opportunity to reflect on her situation, and to consider her options carefully. She decided not to waste the chance. Methodically, she copied key pieces of evidence into her journal, ensuring that every important note, detail, and observation was preserved in her own words. She then replaced the original items exactly as she had found them, taking great care not to arouse suspicion, and began to formulate a concrete plan of escape. According to her journal, Constance resolved that she would flee to Hartford as soon as weather conditions permitted, carrying her evidence to the colonial authorities who she believed could finally expose the truth about her uncle and his brother. Yet fate seemed determined to delay her. The winter of 1665 to 1666 proved to be one of the harshest on record in New England. Snow fell endlessly, burying paths, choking roads, and making travel by foot or horse utterly impossible for weeks on end. All Constance could do was wait, biding her time, writing more carefully in her journal, and observing. By the time spring crept back into the land and the paths became passable once more, she had recorded several additional incidents of deathbed ministrations performed by her uncle. Each instance added to the growing weight of her suspicions, and she carefully gathered further evidence of his methods, which seemed more sinister and deliberate than ever before. During these long weeks, Constance also began to notice a troubling shift in the brothers' behavior toward her. The subtle hints accumulated into an unmistakable pattern. More frequent and insistent questions about her health, unusual discussions about her future prospects, and repeated remarks about the inheritance that awaited her upon reaching adulthood. Her maternal grandmother's estate. The implications unsettled her deeply. One evening, she discovered Obadiah examining her personal belongings in her chamber. He handled her hairbrush and drinking cup with an intensity that chilled her blood. When confronted, he offered a practiced explanation, claiming he was concerned she might be showing the early signs of the melancholy that had once afflicted her father. His stated intention was to prepare preventative treatments for her well-being. Delivered with smooth words and an air of fatherly concern, his explanation only deepened her unease. The moment hardened her resolve. She must escape them before it was too late. According to her journal, Constance carefully planned her departure for April 15, 1666, when she knew that a merchant convoy would be passing through Newfield on its way to Hartford. She quietly assembled her preparations. The evidence she had recorded, a small sum of money raised by secretly selling embroidery work, and a modest bundle of belongings packed for travel. The night before her intended flight, she wrote a final, desperate entry in her journal. "I fear they suspect," she confessed with trembling honesty. She explained that Uncle O had prepared a special tea that evening, insisting it would help her sleep. Constance, wary and cautious, had only pretended to drink it, later disposing of the contents when unobserved. Her words carried a weight of haunting foresight. "If I do not reach Hartford, let whoever finds this journal know that the Pemberton brothers have enriched themselves through wickedness, and that I fear I am their next intended victim." It was the last direct record we have of her thoughts. What happened on the morning of April 15 has been reconstructed only through fragments of testimony, scattered village accounts, and suspiciously conflicting statements. Witnesses reported that Constance was seen in the early morning near the village center, presumably waiting for the merchant convoy she hoped to join. Jeremiah,